Hello, welcome to my latest YouTube video. It's been a while because I've been building all this new shelving and a new area for painting, but I'm finished and ready to get going again. And this time is going to be Richmond Park again, like I did last time. Here I have two reference photographs for the same scene. And the reason why I've got two is this one came out too dark around this area, so I couldn't see what was going on. So I just made a lighter version so I can see all the little nooks and crannies in there, which need to be put in because that's pretty close to the foreground. Also, this printout has got a very sort of browny yellow cast over the whole thing, so I've got to take account of that and adjust it when I come to paint it. So let's get on with it. The first task is to completely cover the panel in paint. This is to get rid of the stark white, and when you're painting the picture for real, any missed spots come out an appropriate colour rather than just white. I'm doing this blocking very crudely and fast, but you could take a little bit more time and do a more accurate version, which could save you some time later on, but I'm a bit impatient to get to the main painting. After the initial blocking has dried, and as I'm using Winsor & Newton Griffin oil colours, which are alkyds, this drying doesn't take too long. A couple of hours is enough. I can start painting from background to foreground. Now this painting's going to take a fair bit of planning because there are so many layers and each one needs to dry, so you can get nice sharp edges on branches that go over the top of previous painted areas. The furthest layer away is the sky, obviously, and here this is just a very simple flat blue, adding a little white as you go down the panel. The way I'm tackling these far layers of dense leaves, branches, tree trunks is to paint a mid-tone of the leaf colour and make a pattern out of the leaves, paying close attention to how this looks on the reference photo. I let that dry a little and then add a highlight colour and go over it again, and then when that's dried a little, the tree trunks and the branches can go in. As these are the distance layers, there's no real darks to go in, so there's no, as you save the lightest areas and the darkest areas for the foreground, this will give you the illusion of depth. With so much layers and waiting for the paint to dry, this isn't going to be a fast painting, but never mind, it's all fun. Once a layer has thoroughly dried, there's always the opportunity to put a wash of colour over it to adjust the overall balance. In that far layer, I do wash over a tiny amount of white, as I thought it was getting a little too dark and contrasty. Once you have finished a layer and started to do the next one on top, you can still go back and adjust things, which is something I do all the time, as when you put the next layer on top, you get a better feel for how the two are working together, and this often means adjustment is necessary. One of the great advantages of oil colour is its ability to go over the top of a previous painted area. It has fantastic covering power, so I'm not worried about painting into the trunk of a tree with the background layer, as when I come to do that trunk, the paint will just completely cover what was there before. The only thing you have to be mindful of is if you've made the paint very thick, so there's lumps in it, which makes a kind of a texture that the light can pick up on. But here, everything I paint is in thin layers, so it's not a problem. As I get further forward in the painting, I start to include some of the ground, and all I'll do is paint the main details, leaving out the finer for another time. When I put in the longer grass, I'm making sure what's behind it is more or less right. Hopefully you won't have to adjust that, because going around all the blades of grass to try and fix what's behind is very tricky. Well, actually I wouldn't bother. I would just go straight over the top of the grass I'd already painted and then put it back in later. vesicles, it's just a little touch here and there. It's about now I'm wondering whether this painting will ever get finished, as I've taken quite a long time to get to where I am now, thanks to the many layers all needing drying time. But even though a small percentage of the panel has been covered, I think I'm about halfway, as the foreground will have far less layers, and even though it's a larger area with higher detail and there will be more painting time, there's a lot less days to go, mainly thanks to that drying time. It's at this point when all you've got is the background and a little bit of the midground painted. It looks like the background is too bold, too contrasty, largely due to the fact you've got nothing else to compare it with. But I'm hoping once the bolder, stronger colours of the foreground are painted in, that background will push further back. At least that's the hope. And it's a little bit tricky here because the background here isn't really that far away. In real life it's probably just 100 yards or so. I'm now getting very close to doing the foreground, and I'm very keen to do the silver birch that's closest to the viewer. I think that will help enormously in giving the painting some depth, but I've got to be sure everything that's behind it and right up to it is painted and dry, so I'll have to be patient and wait just a bit longer. The silver birch is painted pretty much the same as everything else. There's a first pass where the main details are painted. That's then left to dry. Then I'll go over it again with finer details, and I'll keep doing that until I've reached the level of detail I want. Now, I'm often asked, why do you paint photorealistic? Why not just take a photo? Well, I don't think I am all that photorealistic. When you put my painting side by side with the reference photo, there's a large amount of difference, and not just where I've moved things around, taken things out, adjusted the colours, etc. But you can clearly see the brush marks. I don't hide those, and most of the fine detail is left out. I think when you do your own paintings, you have to decide whereabouts on the impressionist, realistic scale you want to be. And it really is a sliding scale from almost abstract, so you can barely recognise the original reference, to hyperrealism, where you really do copy every leaf, every speck. And I like all styles. I just find it more fun to paint realistic, and if I had the time, I really would like to have a go at hyperrealism, but you might be talking 1,000 hours per painting, and if only I could devote that much on one painting. But ultimately there's no right and wrong, so just paint whatever you want in the style you want. It's all good. What I've done a lot in this foreground area at the bottom of the panel is go over everything with the tree and texture brush and a dark colour to splodge in a mottled texture. This is a great way of implying detail that isn't really there, and when you put the much lighter grasses and bits of twigs over the top of this, it makes those bits of detail stand out better, and you get the illusion of detail with very little effort. Finally, I'm getting close to the end. This painting really has taken a lot longer than most of the others I do. As I said earlier, mostly thanks to there was just so many layers that all had to dry. If I was using ordinary oil paints, it would have probably taken months. Of course, there's no hard rule that says you must wait for all these layers to dry in between each other. You can get a much freer, looser style by not bothering to wait and let the paints mix together somewhat. But I particularly want the sharp, crisp edges on things, and that's purely a personal preference. So if you managed to get this far and didn't skip bits to get to the end, I know large amounts of people do, I thank you for watching and hope you'll join me on the next painting. Thank you. Goodbye.